The Regent's Reign, Chapter 7, color-coded. Something was wrong with Arthur, Merlin could tell. Every time anyone touched his bare skin, he would get a concerned look that he normally had when facing down a threat. It was almost worse when she touched him, something they had gotten into the habit of doing since Morgana's fall from grace without the imminent threat of Uther breathing down their necks. She'd never thought she would count the cold as a good thing, but right now the fact that no one had enough skin exposed to even brush was a good thing. When it was her turn on watch, something Gawain had laughed about, teasing that they were in the hands of the most lovely lady in Camelot, earning himself a glare from Arthur, Merlin pulled out the paper. Elian had the brilliant idea of taking an impression of the writing instead of taking the time to write it out. The priority, as the greenery around them withered, had been to get Arthur back on his feet and back to Camelot. He had woken as they were in the process of this, though, and seemed fine. The lettering was in the language of the old religion, something no one in the group was supposed to be able to read. Merlin had taken to it like a duck to water when Gaius had begun to teach her. Squinting in the light of the fire, she studied the lettering. She glanced up as someone stepped toward the fire. She tamped down the first instinct to stuff the paper out of sight. It was just Lancelot. She didn't have to hide from him. He sat down beside her. "So, what does it say?" he asked lowly, glancing around to make sure everyone else was asleep. "Ties bind all things together, set sight on the threads that bind." It's surprisingly unhelpful, though honestly that's pretty ordinary in this type of thing. Nothing can ever be straightforward. Best guess, though? She said, looking around to double-check that the others really were asleep. Someone needed something that doesn't grow until much later in the year. A lot of what was growing was medicinal. Only reason I didn't pick any is because I'm not sure Arthur would let us keep it. And Arthur? I know you've noticed him acting odd. Not sure. He shouldn't have touched the stone. Clearly. But if he hadn't, it would have smacked you in the head, Lancelot pointed out. Yes, and he'd be fine. I can handle enchantments better than he can, Merlin shot back. I'm not arguing that, just stating facts. Gaius will know what to do, Lancelot assured. Merlin let out a breath, trying to keep a calm face. A connection stone? Arthur asked, pacing the physician's chambers. In ancient times, powerful magic users could use such stones to connect to the elements directly, bend them to their wills. With enough training, it was said they could shape mountains and valleys to their whims. Gaius explained. That's dangerous. We need to see that the stone is locked up in the vaults. Merlin, take it to Leon, now. Merlin rolled her eyes, but nodded and left, with the stone wrapped in her scarf so it would not touch her skin. You touched the stone, didn't you, sire? Gaius asked, his eyebrow raised to dangerous levels. It was falling straight for Merlin's head. What else could I do? What do you know about when that happens? Arthur asked, wringing his hands. He was slightly distracted when he spotted strings reaching out from his own neck, gold, green, and red. He quickly let go of his own hand. I only know second-hand, Gaius said, turning to the bookshelf and selecting a tome from a stack. It was written that when someone directly handled a connection stone, they would see the connections that made up the world. If the spell wasn't particularly powerful, it would only be active when in physical contact with someone. That much is true, but does it say what they mean? Arthur asked, craning his neck to read over the physician's shoulder. Yes. Green is a familial tie, not necessarily by blood, but family nonetheless. It tends to be the most common, Gaius read off. Yellow or gold denotes a bond between souls. True love, if you will. Arthur felt himself go bright red. Gaius looked up at him knowingly. Arthur shook his head. What about red? Death. Usually of a loved one. The connection to the one who has passed still exists, but only for the person still living. Gaius explained. Arthur frowned and resumed his pacing. What does it say about the red thread? Does it always lead straight to the heart? He asked, trying not to worry the old physician. Merlin was his niece, though, and if something was wrong with her, the man should know. Gaius flipped a page. Not always. If the one who had passed and the one they had that bond with shared a secret they told no one else, then several who have experienced the spell firsthand have said it's as though the one left behind had their mouths sewn shut. Gaius explained. Arthur blinked. Merlin's mother. She had passed near 2 years ago now. But what secret would they have shared with no one else? That question led him to another. What about a silver thread? What does that mean? Arthur asked, stepping over to the book. He missed Gaius wince. The page was already sitting in front of the prince. No chance to flip it without being observed. The book was clear about this type of thread. It only appeared on certain people. Certain bloodlines carried gifts. These were the only ones that carried the silver thread. Though the book never used the word magic, the implication was clear. But Arthur had met Huneth before she passed. She had been no generational magician, no magic user of any sort. Merlin had never known her father. She had told him that once, back during the first year they had known each other. It had been after the excursion to Eldor to rid it of bandits that had killed Merlin's friend. Will, that was his name. Arthur let out a shaking breath. It made a horrible kind of sense. Merlin was a year younger than him. The Purge had driven many from Camelot, fleeing to Mercia, Estir, and further on to Carlion if they could get there. Eldor was one of only 2 real border towns between Estir and Camelot. Anyone fleeing Camelot would have to have stopped either in Eldor or Engid to gather what supplies they could after crossing the border. Staring down at the book, Arthur asked a question. Does she know that her father had to have been... He couldn't finish the statement. Not here. Not in these walls. Not even in the same kingdom as his father, who would kill her where she stood for the crime of her parentage if he knew. I'm not sure what you're talking about, sire, Gaius said, and Arthur looked up at him. There was a guarded look in the old man's eyes. Gaius, I think we both know what I'm talking about. Please don't make me say it. He wasn't ready. He wouldn't lose Merlin. Not to the same force that had taken Morgana from him, stripped one of the kindest people he'd known for most of his childhood of every ounce of mercy she'd ever had. Or had it been fear that had done that? The same kind of fear now chewing on Arthur's gut. The fear of what could happen if Uther found out. Huneth never told me who Merlin's father was. Merlin has never brought it up to me. I think she may not know either. Or if she does, she does not know the whole truth. Sire, this goes no further. No one can know that it's even possible. Not after everything that's happened. Merlin wouldn't be safe. Arthur stated, slapping the book closed. Gaius blinked at him for a moment, then nodded. The door opened and Merlin entered. She'd gotten her scarf back. Leon's locking up the stone, she said and frowned, looking up at them. Have I missed something? No. How long is this meant to last? Arthur asked Gaius. No longer than a week. Gaius assured. Arthur nodded and stepped over to Merlin, who caught him by the hand. Are you going to be all right? She asked. Arthur's eyes dipped to the thread seeming to seal her mouth. Unconsciously, he ran a thumb over where the edge of the stitches would be if they were physical. "I'll be fine," he said, pulling her into a quick kiss that made Gaius clear his throat and roll his eyes. Arthur left quickly after that. He needed to figure out a few things, but his top priority was ensuring that Merlin would never be found out. She herself might not have access to whatever power her bloodline held, but her mere existence was illegal to the letter of the law. Perhaps it was time he investigated that law that forbade the existence of the woman he loved. He had his suspicions, but it was time he knew for certain. He would need to avoid direct contact with people if he wanted to avoid finding out anything else he wasn't supposed to know about those around him, but Joffrey's library was a good place to do both of those things.